Viewer discretion is advised. What you're about to hear is a dramatized recounting of federal courtroom testimony from the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Reported by Inner City Press, this is not shared for shock value but to inform, to illuminate, and to reflect on the hidden costs of silence. The courtroom was still buzzing from earlier testimonies when the doors opened. And in walked someone no one expected. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. But this wasn't the charismatic showman the world knew. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't performing. He looked hollow. Haunted. A man not stepping into the spotlight, but stepping into truth. He wasn't there to promote a new movie. There was no entourage, no cameras. He came for something more personal. He came to confess. Johnson took the stand slowly. Every movement felt deliberate, heavy. And when he finally spoke, his voice didn't boom. It trembled. "I don't want to be here," he said. "But I have to be." In that moment, the courtroom and perhaps history shifted. Because what followed wasn't just testimony. It was a reckoning. A reckoning with secrets that had lived too long in the dark. The room fell into a hush. Dwayne Johnson didn't enter like a star. There was no swagger, no larger-than-life presence. He shuffled in, shoulders slumped, his face carved with something deeper than exhaustion. It was pain. He looked smaller than usual, not in size, but in spirit. As if the weight he carried couldn't be seen, but was crushing him all the same. He stepped up to the witness stand, paused, and looked around. First, the jury. Then the judge. And finally, his eyes settled on the floor, just before he spoke. "I don't want to be here," he said, voice quiet but resolute. "But I have to be." And with that, something changed. This wasn't performance. This wasn't publicity. This was a man peeling back the curtain on a world few ever get to see, and fewer still survive unchanged. Johnson began to recount what he had endured. Not just as a rising actor, but as a man caught in a system that demands obedience disguised as opportunity. What he described next didn't just challenge the Hollywood myth, it shattered it. This wasn't about ambition. It wasn't about fame. It was about what success costs when you're forced to pay with silence. And as the courtroom listened, so did the world. Because this wasn't just a story about one man. It was a mirror, held up to an entire industry. In the early 2000s, Dwayne Johnson was at a crossroads, leaving behind the roar of the wrestling ring and stepping into the uncertain world of Hollywood. He began receiving invitations from one of the biggest names in the industry, Sean Diddy Combs. These weren't just parties. They were exclusive gatherings filled with A-list celebrities, powerful executives, and industry insiders. At first, it felt like an open door, a chance to connect, to build a new path, to break into the film world. But then something shifted. The atmosphere grew heavier. The bright lights dimmed. The parties stopped being just about networking. They became something else. Stranger. Darker. More unsettling. Johnson described it plainly. It stopped feeling like opportunity, he said. It started feeling like a test. A test of what? Of loyalty. Of silence. Of obedience. In a world where fame and success seemed to hinge on playing the game, the stakes were no longer about talent or hard work. They were about survival. And in that game, the price was far higher than anyone had imagined. Dwayne Johnson called them obedience trials. These weren't just strange parties or industry events, they were secret rituals held in hidden locations, often in the dead of night. No phones allowed. No assistants or handlers nearby. Just the raw reality of fear and expectation. Johnson described the eerie silence as he was led into rooms where the rules were unspoken but absolute. One night, a moment stands out more than the rest. He was handed a tray, on it lay something unimaginable, raw monkey brains. Johnson's voice lowered as he explained. Everyone who made it ate. Everyone who didn't, vanished. The message was clear, this was a test of obedience, of endurance. He ate the brains. Not because he wanted to. Not because he was brave. But because he felt he had no choice. It wasn't a victory. It was survival. In that moment, he realized the true cost of the industry's unspoken rules, where silence and compliance were the price for opportunity, and refusing meant being erased. Johnson's story reveals a darker side of Hollywood, where power and fear collide behind closed doors. The testimonies grew darker with each passing moment. Johnson spoke of blindfolds, shadows swallowed him whole as he was led into locked rooms where escape wasn't an option. There, he was forced to chant phrases that echoed like a mantra in the silence. I surrender. I serve. I belong. These weren't acts of faith or devotion. They were calculated rituals designed to strip away identity and autonomy. Johnson made it clear this wasn't about belief. It was about breaking a person down until they were no longer themselves. He looked at the courtroom and said quietly, I wasn't invited because they liked me. I was invited because I'd proven I could stay silent. Silence was the currency here. It bought you a seat at the table, but it cost you your voice. And with every whispered chant, every locked door, the price of compliance became painfully clear. This was control. Not just of body, but of mind and spirit. A system built not on talent or merit, but on fear and obedience. Johnson's testimony peeled back the glamorous veneer of Hollywood, exposing a darker truth lurking just beneath the surface. Silence had its rewards. As Dwayne Johnson stayed quiet, as he played along, things began to change. Roles came to him, no auditions necessary. Offers landed at his feet, as if success was being handed over on a silver platter. His fame grew, his star rose higher than ever before. But beneath the spotlight, Johnson wrestled with a harsh truth. I wasn't chosen for talent, he admitted. I was chosen because I played the game. Hollywood, he realized, wasn't the fair battlefield the world imagined. It wasn't about skill or merit. It was a hierarchy, one built on secrets, on silent agreements, on fear. Success wasn't earned. It was negotiated in shadows. And those who refused to stay silent were left out in the cold. Johnson's words peeled back the glossy facade of the entertainment industry, revealing a system where power was wielded quietly and compliance was the currency that bought your place in the game. In this world, talent mattered less than the ability to survive in silence. The turning point came unexpectedly, at an event in the Hollywood Hills. Johnson believed he was attending a private screening. A chance to see a film with peers, to celebrate work, to be part of something familiar. But what he walked into was far from what he expected. The atmosphere was cold and foreboding. Masked guests filled the room, faces hidden, identities concealed. Security was tight, almost oppressive. No laughter. No warmth. Only a thick tension that pressed down on everyone present. In a quiet corner, a young actor sat curled up, tears streaking down his face. He whispered over and over. They told me this is what it takes. Johnson stood frozen, the weight of that moment crashing down on him. It was more than just a test. It was an initiation into a system that demanded more than talent or passion. It demanded surrender. That was when it hit me, Johnson said later. I wasn't surviving. I was surrendering. In that instant, the illusion shattered. Success wasn't about thriving. It was about giving up your voice, your integrity, your very self, just to stay in the game. After that night, Johnson sat in silence for years. He carried the weight alone, burying the truth deep inside, afraid of what speaking out might cost him. But then, something changed. When Cassie Ventura stepped into the spotlight with her case, her bravery sparked something in him. Her courage was a beacon in the darkness. She reminded me, silence protects the wrong people. Those words echoed inside him, breaking through years of fear and doubt. It wasn't about seeking revenge. It wasn't about making headlines or advancing a career. It was about reclaiming his voice. About standing up not just for himself, but for those who still remained silent. Johnson chose truth over fear. He chose integrity over complicity. And in that choice, he found something more powerful than fame. Freedom. This was no longer a story about what he endured. It was a story about what he refused to accept any longer. And by stepping forward, Johnson didn't just change his own path. He helped crack open a system built on silence. Then came the moment that changed everything. Johnson turned his gaze toward Sean Diddy Combs' quiet, seated behind his legal team. There was no yelling. No outburst. No dramatic confrontation. Just a steady, unflinching truth. "You made me believe I had to give up who I was to succeed," he said calmly, his voice strong but measured. But that wasn't power. That was fear, disguised as influence. His words cut through the silence like a blade, clear, unwavering. There was no crack in his voice. No hesitation. Just a man reclaiming himself, taking back control over his story. "You don't define my legacy. Not anymore." In that moment, Johnson wasn't just speaking to one man. He was speaking to every person who's ever been forced to surrender their truth for someone else's gain. He was telling the world that no amount of fear or influence can ever truly own a soul. That legacy, identity, and power come from standing tall in your own truth. No matter the cost. As Johnson stepped down from the stand, something had shifted. He wasn't a brand anymore. Not a superstar. Not a former wrestler with a global fanbase. Just a man. A man who, after years of silence, was finally choosing truth over fear. Before leaving the courtroom, he turned back to face the gallery, those watching, listening, hoping. "This isn't about fame," he said. "It's not about revenge. It's for those who never made it to this chair. The ones still trapped. Still afraid." And then, with quiet strength, he shared a truth that pierced through the glamour and illusion of Hollywood. Hollywood has been built on a myth that success justifies abuse. But that myth is breaking. Not with rage, but with truth. "I stayed quiet because I thought I had something to lose. But I had nothing, without my integrity." Then, without fanfare, he left. No cameras followed. No handlers waited to spin his words. Just silence. And finally, the kind of silence that means peace. A silence earned by courage. A silence that speaks louder than any spotlight ever could.